Welcome to this BFDG podcast. I'm Jonathan Paul Green, production designer and chair of the BFDG, and today we're talking about sustainability. This is a subject that the BFD are very passionate about, and every year we award a Planet Positive Award as part of our annual awards ceremony, recognising sustainable practice in the art department. More about that a little bit later. But today I'm joined by Jimmy Keeping, director and co-founder of Sustainable Film, Rhidian Davies, client services manager at Sustainable Film, and production designer Blair Barnette. So, welcome one and all. Before we start, let me tell you a little bit about the British Film Designers Guild. We're a growing community of over 650 amazing creatives and production designers working across film, TV, and commercials. The Guild has been around for more than 75 years, originally set up to raise the profile of the art department and support its members. And those values are very much at the heart of what we do today. You can find out more details by visiting britishfilmdesigners.com. So I'd love to start by hearing from you, Jimmy. Give us a brief outline about what sustainable film does.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Jonathan. So I am one of the sustainability consultants, and as you say, co-founder and co-director of Sustainable Film. So we are a sustainability consultancy. We work primarily in film and TV, but across the screen sector as well. So we kind of split our work. We kind of say we do three different things essentially. Our bread and butter and the things that we do mostly are working directly on film and TV productions. So we come on board at an early stage to set in place a sustainability strategy, oversee that with the production, and then report on it at the end. We also work really closely with our supply chains. We work with suppliers to film and TV to help them understand their own sustainability, do carbon footprinting, sustainability policies, and carbon audits and that sort of thing. And then we also work on projects. So we do some training. We've done some training with the BFDG around sustainable design. We've also done sustainability coordinator training, and we work on a variety of different projects. So we're working with BAFTA Albert to audit their suppliers directory. So yeah, we like to see ourselves as a bit of a holistic consultancy working across various areas in the industry.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's fantastic. Uh, just as an overview, am I right in saying that the kind of biggest areas of footprint within a film and TV production is maybe transportation first, then power and energy, and then maybe art department slash set materials? Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think close to that. Yeah, I think it's very astute of you. From we generally talk about fuel as the main driver or the impact on film and TV, and that's from travel or from power. So those are the two areas that generally make up anywhere from 40% to 70% of production. That's generally the high-end TV and large film productions that we work on. And then below that, you've got various different things. Actually, waste doesn't really move the needle too much in terms of the carbon footprint because of the sheer amount of power and fuel and travel and accommodation and all of that goes into the production. We usually see waste as a material impact a bit more than a carbon impact. But as you know, throughout your career, Jonathan, I'm sure, and Blair, of course, the sheer amount of waste that is produced from set creation, set destruction. So yeah, it does have a massive impact in this industry.
That's great. Thank you for clearing that up. And I'm going to come to you, Blair. And as designers, we're kind of only too aware of how wasteful an industry we can be. And I think it's safe to say that most of us start a project with sustainability very much in mind, and quite rightly so. But I'd love to discuss with you your experience on productions, whether you feel there is a real wish for productions to be sustainable versus a kind of greenwashing policy box ticking motivation to, maybe for production to get Albert accreditation, because I've experienced myself a mixture of both of those, but interested to hear from you.
Well, 100%, Jonathan. You're right. I mean, and I do think that we are leaning towards that being more universal request. I mean, people who are watching content want to feel that their content has been made in an ethical way. I think we're all becoming more aware of the problems that are more global, and we all want companies to be held accountable. And I think that most production companies, I mean, there's nobody who's actively, I hate the environment, I want to kill all the dolphins, I want to throw everything and blow up the earth. Nobody actually thinks that way. But everybody's just kind of backed into a corner where they're not given the time, the resources, the energy, and the bandwidth to actually do anything in a meaningful way. And so a lot of greenwashing happens not because people are duplicitous, because they're just actually, they've run out of any sort of facilitating measures to be able to make this happen. And so there is this kind of false economy that's put in to productions to say, let's have your soft prep be shorter, let's have less people involved, let's try to make this on a lot less money. And yet we're still wanting to do more things that take a little bit more time to unpack and do things in efficient ways. It's all in the planning. So we can't underestimate the importance of our prep time. And that's our biggest hurdle right now. It's not people buying into the philosophy. It's that we don't have as much prep time as we need.
I think that's a really critical part of the equation, and I'm definitely going to come back to you a bit later, Blair, so we can kind of unpack that a bit more. But talking of financial implications, so Rhidian, obviously there's a cost factor, but also I want to ask you whether there's an assumption, whether it's correct that there's an assumption that being sustainable is more expensive, because I think that, in my view, a lot of people think that it costs more money to be more sustainable, and that's obviously going to have an impact on how productions work, because money is a very powerful factor.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jonathan. Um, the short answer is that's sustainability is such a broad topic that it's quite hard to say that yes or no, it's going to be more expensive. I think often the thing that you'll very commonly hear when you go to sustainability conferences, people talking about inputting new processes, buying new technology, is there will be an initial outlay, which is more expensive than the status quo. But ultimately, sustainability, we consider the same to be efficiency. So we are putting in technologies or processes in place to use less energy, to use less materials, to require less waste management. And all of these things obviously are cheaper in the long term. Some of those things, let's take a really basic example, is if a studio is going to be covering a couple of its stages in solar panels, in the long term, yeah, they're going to be reducing their energy bill because they've got on-site power generation. But in the short term, they are going to have to pay for that investment. So in that case, yes, you are going to be paying money, but you're going to be putting together a comprehensive long-term cost benefit analysis to say, right, after 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, we're paying that back. So when we're looking at initial technologies, and that's often on productions when we're talking more about power and transport as well, that's where the initial expense is then offset by longer term savings. I think more particularly in the art department, if we hone in here, it's a little bit more murky. It won't necessarily be about technologies or big pieces of machinery that you're buying in. It's going to be changes to, for instance, materials that we're buying. Is getting wood from someone off the back of a lorry, like 2 towns over that your mate's cousin knows, is that going to be cheaper than something that has a really clear, we've got all of the paperwork, the entire chain of supply from when it's first cut down all the way to, that it's FSC accredited? Yes, it probably is. That's obviously a very silly example, but to do things properly is often going to cost a little bit more because you're getting the assurances through that. However, my argument would be that you're not only you getting the assurance of it being a sustainable product, but you're getting assurance of it being a proper product, if you will. It's something that is going to be more sturdy. It's something that's going to be it's going to last you longer, and therefore there's the sustainability implication of that. But it just means you're going to end up with a better product in the end. So I think it's quite black and white to think it's going to be more expensive or it's not more expensive. You've got to look at the longevity of the thing that you're building, the quality of the on-screen appearance, and then the future savings as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Blair, I'm going to come back to you and talk about how you or how an art department or production designer would deal with the extra workload of running a sustainable art department. Because as always, productions are looking to cut costs, as you've already mentioned, save money. How can we balance the sustainability drive and effort with the size of our existing art departments, particularly on the smaller budget productions where crew are even more scarce?
Oh gosh, that's so hard. But I
It's a
mean,
whole topic all on its own, isn't it?
it really is because yeah, there's so many other things that need to fall in place that are daisy chained together. But the fact of the matter, it is a top-down system. So the higher up that you can get the investment, the better. And me as an HOD, when I come onto a job, I start that landscape talking, that kind of language from the very beginning. As I'm negotiating my contract and signing my deal memo, I use a lot of positive language, like when we are doing things in a sustainable way and when we have an extra day to pack things down and take things apart. Instead of, oh, could you just, or, oh, can we consider? I think the more that you just approach things from this is a done deal, this is how we're going to be doing things, that sets the template, sort of. I mean, I always like to say, if you say things enough, it just becomes a fact, as social media has proven. And if you start with those conversations early on, the more communication that you have, the more speaking across to other departments and managing things as a team instead of a siloed way of thinking within your own department, you'll find these little pockets of bandwidth that you can draw from, saying, okay, well, if I do this in conjunction with you, that will actually save an extra day. And oh, you're going to do things this way. Oh, I didn't know that, because if I thought you were going to do it this way, so that meant I was going to bring these trucks here. But the more communication you find, that your workflow has been lessened a little bit, and you can actually run a lot more efficiently if one hand knows what the other hand is doing. I mean, I'm sure you found, how many times have you done an absolute beautiful set, it's gorgeous, you put so much detail into it, and then it's lit in such a way that you don't see any of that at all, and then they never turn the camera around and 3/4 of the set that you've just built doesn't even make it onto the screen. You know, a lot of that can be.
No, that's a very good point.
You know, and it's just some of that can be taken down with a lot of communication to begin with, and not letting people put you in a corner and say, oh, I don't care, I don't really, just make the set for me, we'll figure it out on the day. You go, no, actually, I need to know what your shots are, what lenses are you using, show me your storyboard of what you're seeing, and I'm going to build that and only that. Because it's easy enough for you to change, oh, I want something different, I'm going to change a lens, or oh, I'm going to have something different, I'm going to bring an extra person in. But the art department, our job is so physical, and it's a matter of physics how much effort it takes to do this world building. And if you could minimize what you actually really need as much as possible, you're halfway winning the battle right there. But also working with locations. You know, there's a lot of other departments that you can work with and find out what their needs are. That really helps minimize what you need in your self prep.
I think that's a really important point, not only for sustainability, but just, you know, with budgets being squeezed across the board, it becomes more and more important to focus people on what exactly they need. And I know we touched on how wasteful an industry we are generally, but how much better if, as you say, we only build the bits that we actually need to shoot. And we've all been on jobs where we've been asked to create a room or an environment, and for whatever reason, only half of it ends up being seen. So not only are we wasting the entire set because it may never be used again, but we're also wasting valuable resources and materials by building things that are not even going to be used.
And
So I wonder if
morale.
there needs to be more of a kind of an education. Yes, of course, morale. Yes, it can be very demoralizing, and time wasteful as well. And it's often left to us as designers to kind of fix all of those problems. But I think as a topic of conversation about sustainability in general, it kind of, as you say, it needs to come from the top down, and it's not just about being resourceful. It's about uh, knowing exactly what is needed and not being wasteful in what gets built. So I think, yeah, that's a very important point, I would say. Um, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you about obviously various, there's a huge variety in budget bands. So, for example, if you take something like a major motion picture like Wicked and compare it to a TV drama like Midsummer Murders, the amount of carbon footprint and waste is going to be enormously different. Should we, as an industry, only be focusing on those huge scale productions, or does every production play a part in this?
I think every production definitely plays a part in this, even if it's just to the point where we're learning from certain shows to feed into other shows. Speaking to a lot of the sustainability people in some of the broadcasts, the ability to have an EastEnders, a Coronation Street, a long-running series is so valuable because they're able to implement things one day, and then those will be able to live on it forever. So I think it's crucial for us to be able to learn from all of the productions that we're working on. In terms of a footprint, obviously the bigger shows generally do have a much larger footprint. They have the bigger budgets to be able to fly cast across the world. They have execs having to come in for meetings and come to look at the sets and be visible. And then they've got the elaborate sets. You talk about Wicked, the set design on Wicked was just so phenomenal that the amount of construction that was taking place in some of the locations and the power that goes towards these locations. It is huge. So yeah, I think from looking at the various different productions, it's really important that we put a lot of focus into those large shows, because there would be, there's more room for error, I guess, or the room for improvement. So we should be able to see more improvement from those shows. I think with the longer running shows, I think it's on The Crown, wasn't it? I know when it was up for the Planet Positive Award, looking at the deck of that, they reused the set. I think it was up to 50 times or something like that. How do we learn from that reuse of materials and reuse of set and be able to bring that back into the studio shows and the larger shows? Yeah, I think we often find with the larger shows that there is an element of people wanting to create for the sake of creating, and creating a universe that is their universe and they have ownership of. So we find it quite difficult to separate the ego from the design and find a way of being able to reuse sets across multiple shows and that sort of thing. But there are various instances of that, and we talked a little bit about reuse of sets earlier on, and a point that I was thinking of at that point, when I started my career about 10-15 years ago, there was a standing set at Leavesden Studios that was, I think it was built for Tarzan, or potentially even one before that. It was a rock face. That set stood for about 3 or 4 years, and it was used by Tarzan, it was used by Jungle Book, it was used by a couple of other shows after that. So there's definitely instances where we can see really good reuse of resources and reuse of sets. And that's at the larger end as well. So completely gone off topic. They got very
No,
excited
not
by
at
saying that
all.
point.
I mean, that was another question I had, because and when I first started out in TV, there was at least one company that would hire scenery, and one set in particular that I remember using a number of times because I worked on a topical comedy show was interior of the House of Commons, and that was in storage, and it kept on being reused over and over and over again. um, but as an industry, we find it very easy and normal to be hiring furniture and props, but hiring scenery doesn't seem to have caught on. And I know the cost of storage is maybe a factor, but do you think there's a world in which reusable scenery becomes more normal?
Yeah, I think we have to, and unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can continue in the material use that the trajectory that we're currently on. So we need to see more reuse in the industries, particularly from a set design and set use. So yeah, I definitely see it. It would be great. I'm sure that there's been numerous projects that we've worked on. I think, even last year, the amount of polystyrene rocks that were built across the shows that we're working on. Like, why are we using that across? Why we're not using that across multiple shows? Why is there not a storage space where we could rent polystyrene rocks or cliff faces or anything like that? Like you say, it's generally because they're really big and they're really bulky and they're really difficult to store. I think I guess in the kind of the topical comedy scale, having flattage is such a simple storage solution. It's such a
Yeah.
simple way of being able to pack everything down, put it to the sides, and then bring it back out when you need it again. So hopefully we get to a world where things are compressed slightly, and we're able to store more sets. But yeah, I think we need to become a bit more smarter in the materials that we use as well. I think if we're not able to store sets for 5 years before they could potentially be used again, we need to be really clever about the materials that we're using, so that we know that we're using recycled material, we're using recyclable material, we're using material that's easy to strip off, so that the raw resources, materials, the timber apply, all of that can be reused, and we can create a circular solution with all of that. And then maybe the skins can be something that can be bulk stored. We're working with vector sets at the moment on a production, and just the ability to put up a set really, really quickly that is made of a cardboard type like material, packed down really light and stored. So it's solutions like that which I think are going to become more prevalent in the industry.
I mean, that's really good to hear, and we need to be finding these solutions. But I guess another big sticking point is the kind of cycle of bespoke within set design, where everybody assumes that something has to be a completely bespoke design in order to not compromise the look. Um, but I wonder if there's a world in which, as you say, there's elements that get reused, so that we're not just taking a piece of construction and reusing it as it is, but we're reusing materials rather than design pieces.
Yeah, and stop building poly rocks. We've got enough poly rocks. We've made enough polystyrene rocks over the years. Surely we've got enough.
There are actually some in storage at some prop houses, but yeah,
Great.
it's not the best material. So Blair, time prep is a big factor, coordination, documentation. What part of the production timeline do you feel is currently the biggest bottleneck for sustainability, and what can we do to help unblock that?
Well, it was like I said earlier, it's the prep, because when you're planning for something, every prop that you buy, every choice that you make, you need to be thinking at that moment what its end of the line is. whether it's going to die at the end of the production, or whether it's going to be put in storage or moved on to somebody else. You need to make a responsible choice, knowing what's going to happen at that moment. You can't leave it to the very end, and you can't talk to the last couple of prop guys at the last day of wrap and go, okay guys, make our entire production sustainable, find a place for all of these things. The last man standing is going to just be like, what? It's just not possible. So there needs to be a very solid and thought out workflow for everything that you're doing, and that needs to happen in the very beginning. So it is a false economy to do away with these preps in the very beginning of it. But even as you go along, you're going to come up with hurdles. You're going to come up with obstacles and things you hadn't planned for. So at every stage in the game, don't leave it until later. Knock it on the head to have that conversation right then and there. If you need an extra day in location, you know that in the very beginning, say it and put your foot down and negotiate that then. Don't let yourself be kind of gaslit into thinking it's going to be okay later on, because it won't. You've got to really be thoughtful and really be strong about your decisions. And if something can't happen, then something else has got to give. It's not all on us or all on the last people to sort it out. You've got to trade off and say, okay, all right, so we can't have that extra day in location, so that means that we need to not have these materials. We're going to do something different instead in the planning process. And there's always a better solution. I mean, we're magic. We are wizards at what we do. And if you just sit and think about it, there'll be another way of doing something, but it's getting everybody else on board with that. And I'd like to think that, going back to what we were saying earlier, one of the biggest problems in this whole industry is when we went from film to digital, because that set, even though it's great and it gives us a lot of opportunities, what's happened now is we have this completely false way of thinking that if you do something digital, you can have as much as you want and it doesn't impact anything, it doesn't cost any more. So I can keep shooting, keep getting it in the bag, and keep, just more shots, more takes. Let's have it over here because I'm not burning film. Well, film is the least expensive part of that. The more you take.
Yeah, it is now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is really the least expensive part of it. And we all know how expensive film is. But then you've got more people that you're needing to feed, and more trucks that you're going to have on the road when you have extra days in production, and more time in the editing suite, and more servers burning power, and more sets being built to cover all those extra shots that you have. And if you put it in layman's terms, think about when you used to buy a roll of like 35 millimeter film to take 36 exposures on your camera, on your SLR camera. You thought really carefully what that shot was, and before you pushed the trigger, you knew exactly what your shot was going to be. And pretty much, if you look at when you developed that roll of film, most of the shots on that roll were pretty good. Whereas, look at your phone right now. How many pictures do you take a day of whatever? And how many times do you actually go back and look at those photos ever again? It's disposable, and you don't care about it because there's not been enough thought put into it. So it's just a lot of garbage, really. But you've spent all of that time and all of that energy taking these photos that don't mean anything. So it's the same sort of thing. We need to go back to, even if you're not using film, we need to pretend that we are and make every single plan count. Think with a view all the way to the edit, and only take what you need. And put your foot down. Don't let the directors and the DOPs go, I'll just decide on the day. Bring me 20 options, I'll decide on the day. No, I'm going to bring you 3 options. You're going to decide now, because I can put them in front of you and you can think about it. And I want you to choose now, and that's what I'm going to bring.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think it kind of speaks to a much bigger industry issue whereby our production practices have become a lot more fluid and less restrictive because of I guess, costs being driven down and time for being able to process film versus digital. And I think it makes complete sense that, and we keep going back to this from the top down scenario, but if productions are run in a slightly different way, that would clearly help towards a more sustainable production. It's not just about each department doing their bit. It's about, maybe doing less generally. We've kind of touched on other materials, but I wonder, Rhidian, whether you might be able to give us any kind of practical real world examples of good practice or new materials that are available to use to be more sustainable from a material point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll start by pointing anybody who's interested to the BFDG website. Shameless free plug for you guys there, but
Thank you.
the Planet Positive Awards, which we help to chair each year, that recognizes sustainability in the art department. That has on the website, you guys have done really well at not only putting up who are the nominees and the winners each year, but you've uploaded everybody's case studies and their entries. So I've used this a few times actually as reference points for thinking what could be some alternatives that we can talk to art departments and shows that we work on, and we signpost people to best practice and ideas that we are very much sustainability experts. We've got a lot of intel and a lot of interest in the art department, but no means are we experts, and there's no means can we know everything that's happening all at one time. So that's a great resource that people can hop on and have a look. Jimmy's already talked a little bit about vector sets, and it's a really exciting and, to be honest, quite obvious kind of development in the set deck world, in my view. The use of cardboard, obviously, the fact it's so much more lightweight is such a big part. People think about the onset, the ease of which taking it apart, reassembling, but it's also about transport. You can save so many. It's quite hard to track, but you're able to save a lot of emissions and fuel based on the delivery, because I don't know the exact figures, but let's say it's going to be about 25% of the equivalent amount of the equivalent size, 25% of the weight of the equivalent volume of timber, which is a massive saving.
Yeah.
An area that also Jimmy's talked on about, and you can kind of seen some themes of things that are common barriers within our world, is about polystyrene, which is brilliant as a tool for creating background scenery. It's really easy to carve. Again, it's very lightweight and transportable. It is terrible for the environment though. So that is one of the big sort of like trophies that we're all hunting in the sustainability world, is how do we overcome the use of poly. We've been working with a couple of companies, and there's some potential future compostable polystyrene solutions out there. One of the things that often is kind of like the power of the market is we go out of our way to try and seek these kind of solutions, but they're often quite small companies, or there's someone who works at a bigger company who's got an idea and is looking for an investment. And so there might be these sort of possibilities out there, but it's going to be a few years before we're able to get someone into a factory space, or ideas put into prototypes, put into that whole process. So compostable polystyrene, if there's anyone listening who's got any possible solutions to the poly problem, we're all ears. Please come to us. I was lucky enough recently for the second time to run the BFDG training, or run a training for the BFDG in partnership with Crew HQ, and part of that training we're talking about solutions to materials, and one of the things that came up quite a lot is 3D printing. So 3D printing has become incredibly common in the department, in a lot of departments, for model making, but also for visualization and things like SFX. And the chemicals that go into industrial scale printing are really not good, and not just from a sustainability standpoint of how do you manage that waste once it's dealt with, but also from a health and safety standpoint, it can be quite dangerous. So that's another area. I'm not actually giving you solutions. I'm giving you lots of problems, and
No, it's really
I'm putting
interesting to hear, though.
putting out a plea. But I think that's an area that natural organic alternatives, unfortunately, are really difficult to come by because they just don't have the strength, they don't have the moldability at the moment that those 3D printing plastics do. But that's somewhere I know there's within the last session I ran, a couple people mentioned people they knew or on jobs there'd been sort of little bits of research done where there are burgeoning ideas out there that again maybe are not quite at that ready to market phase, or especially on some of the really big feature films or larger scale productions we're working on, they wouldn't be suitable yet. But I think this goes to speak to a point that you and Jimmy were making earlier, that the importance of these smaller shows is often they're at a scale where we can try these things out. That if a model doesn't quite get printed properly on a really small scale, small budget show, it's going to have less of an impact than if it's on something really high budget, really tight deadlines with more money and stress involved. So we can view those sorts of productions as kind of like a training ground, or it's like an R&D area really for some of the ideas that are coming into the industry.
I mean, that's really interesting, because I'd kind of never thought of it that way, in that maybe these lower budget, lower band productions are the experimental area rather than the big ones. I always assumed that bigger budgets, bigger productions would have more scope to be more experimental. But I think you're absolutely right. It probably is counterintuitive for them to be experimental. They want to know that something works without question, whereas maybe there's a bit more flexibility in these smaller productions, perhaps. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think.
I think it's fair to say it's possibly a bit of a catch-22 we're caught in sometimes, where the bigger productions maybe they will have more of a budget and more, especially an R&D budget, if you're working with much bigger streamers or studios to try things out, but a much smaller margin for error. Whereas you've got the reverse on a smaller band, right? And you have to try and find that sweet spot. The only other thing I'd add in about the smaller productions is not just about that sort of proving ground for materials, but also you want to make sure we're focusing our sustainability efforts there as well, because it's about culture change. It's about the individuals on those productions, and your lighting tech or your props buyer or whoever on EastEnders or Midsummer Murders. Sure, the decisions they're making on that production may not be like globally affecting. However, if we're instilling a sustainability culture at that level, and if people go on to work on much bigger productions and with much more an impact, and they're taking that on themselves, and they're then having an impact on everyone else they're working with. And Blair very kindly came along and helped along the most recent training we gave, and she gave a really quite invigorating sort of like call to arms of all of the people they're talking about, no matter where, like what room you're in, who you're with. It could be the smallest thing, it could be the biggest thing. If you're always really preaching like the sustainability word and you're pushing it, you don't know who you're going to be impacting there and then, and you don't know who then that person's going to be impacting, and you've got to think about that chain reaction going on. So very much it is holistic, the change we can make, I think.
I really like that approach. I think that's great. And again, from a practical point of view, for people working in the art department on a production, and let's say you've tried to be as sustainable as you possibly can with the materials, but there's going to come a time when maybe the show doesn't happen again, or it's not recommissioned, or it was only a one-off. Disposal is obviously a big part of our sustainability pipeline. What are the kind of ethical ways of disposing with things for people that have scenery and furniture and props that can no longer be used on that production?
Yeah, I'd jump in and said, yeah, do love a good bit of disposal. Yeah, I mean, there's numerous elements. We talk a lot about the waste hierarchy, and right at the bottom is, you've probably heard of reduce, reuse, recycle, and there's various different bits that have been added in there. But when we come to the end of a production, we've got a large amount of materials to get rid of. donation charities have really been our best friends for the last decade or so. I'm sure you're all fully aware that there's a lot of charity shops and charities that are kind of based very close to the studios, and a lot of them really do profit from being close to the studios because of the amount of materials that we get rid of at the end of any high-end TV or large film production. We'll have fridges, microwaves, kettles, toasters, all of that will need to go somewhere. So it's not just you think of a film production when it closes down, you've got mountains of timber and polystyrene and plaster and steel to get rid of, but actually there's a lot more that goes into it. So donating a lot of those usable items to charity shops and organizations, and then the reusable materials from a timber perspective. We've got multiple shows that we try and transfer materials from show to show first of all, and then from there we look to donate to charity. So on 2 shows over Pinewood quite recently, we just transferred, I think it's about 300 or 400 sheets of MDF from one show to the other. We're very fortunate in the UK to be quite busy at the moment. It feels like we're going into a bit of a slump going into Christmas, and hopefully that'll pick up next year. It seems like it will do. But we're in a good position where there's a lot of construction teams that will work closely together across all of the studios. So we've got, when one show shuts down, it's very likely that construction team will go into another show and hence be able to take a lot of the material, old paint, timber, ply, flooring, chipboard, all of that onto the show with them. Once we get past the realms of something that is donatable, unfortunately, we have to look at disposal. There's a number of different construction waste companies that we deal with, but unfortunately here in the UK there's a big push for waste to energy. It's the lesser of 2 evils, I'd say, when it comes to waste to energy or
And is that
landfill.
the burning of waste to create energy?
Yeah, exactly that. So being a small island, we don't really have much space. So landfill has been quite a premium for the last 10 years, and costs to put materials into landfill has been going further and further up. And then over the last 10 years or so, there's been a big push to divert that material from landfill and instead send it to waste to energy, which is incineration, where they'll burn the materials, they'll put everything into a big furnace, and then there'll be pistons and pumps to be able to capture the heat from that, which will drive turbines to produce energy, and that energy will then be fed back into the national grid. So we'll quite often find that there's just I think it's just outside Milton Keynes. There's a massive waste to energy facility called Viridor, and I think they say that they power 50,000 homes annually, and that must be a lot of waste that they're just essentially burning. Which on one hand, it's great that we can create a resource, we can create power from these materials that we're disposing of, but at the end of the day, that material is lost forever. Essentially, once it's incinerated, once it's burnt, it's gone forever. We're never going to see that again. We got a bit of ash and some heat from it. Yeah, we try and divert as much as possible from waste to energy and from landfill, and put back into the system where possible. We donate a lot of timber to organisations such as Men's Sheds, Habitats for Humanity, and there's a variety of other charities, excellent charities that I'm forgetting right now. But yeah, it's at the start of the waste hierarchy, it's reduced, and I'm sure it's kind of come across in everything that everyone said on this call, is that we need to find ways of reducing the waste that we can. Like, how do we find ways of reducing the material that we're using? We're using different materials, using recyclable materials, using recycled materials, so that end disposal isn't as bad as it could be.
And I guess really that again leads to more education within the industry, and how we educate people to look for these resources and best practices, and B, to make it almost to make it the default, much like I think back to when health and safety was firmly implicated or implemented into the business, maybe 20 odd years ago, where it became a really big topic and of compliance and all sorts. And I just wonder whether there, would be, and now it's just default. Everyone has health and safety in mind whenever they do anything. And I wonder, will we ever get to that point with sustainability where that's just the default way of operating rather than, having to kind of be forced to do it? Do you think I mean, it feels like we're moving in that direction. Do you think in, another 10, 20 years time, everyone will just look back at this and go, I can't believe how unsustainable they were, much like we look back and go, I can't believe how unsafe we used to be?
Yeah, definitely. I think, we're in a position where we're actually going to start running out of resources. So, like I said earlier, we are going to have to be a bit more careful with or integrate sustainable practice into everyone's workload. And you actually find a lot that there's a lot more from a training perspective being provided at the moment. So everyone's aware that, if you start a show, that you'll do a health and safety training, you do an anti-harassment and bullying training, you do diversity, equity, inclusion training. And there's a number of productions that we're working on now that sustainability has become a part of that training process. So every person that's coming onto the show is doing all of those trainings, and is, it helps in increasing awareness. It helps increasing the idea that it is super important. It's something that affects everyone. So yeah, I definitely see. I definitely think that we'll see more of it within the workplace, from a training, from a communication, and from a visibility perspective. Because health and safety is visible every day. We see people in high vis, we see people in hard hats, and we see signage, we see eye wash stations, that sort of thing. And we'll just see more of that from a sustainability perspective for sure.
Brilliant. Here's hoping.
Can I just say also,
Of course.
On that note, also, not only should we be making our productions greener, but we should be telling that story so that happens. The world building that we do should carry a sustainable narrative within it. And it doesn't even have to be hitting you over the head with it, but we should design for the future that we want. Because everybody copies what they see in media. If you see it on television, it becomes a reality soon. I mean, look at sci-fi in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. That's now real, and people have designed things off of what some production designer came up with ages ago. So we actually have this unique position to be able to put on screen the new normal. And hopefully, like what you just said, in 20 years time, you'll go, oh, wow, can you believe they used to do it like that? Oh my goodness. But we need to tell that story now with what we put on screen. Don't just be sustainable when you're running your department, but actually put it on the screen. Make people do things in the way that you would like them to do in your storytelling.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. Really important point. I'm going to, as we kind of start to wind down, I'm just going to ask you all a couple more questions. But Blair, so if you could add one new role to the art department that would support sustainability, what would it be?
That's funny you should say that, because I'm actually trying to do that right now on a pretty big production. They've already gotten their crew, and I'm trying to insert a new role for myself. That's a hybrid between sustainability coordinator and an art director, and I'd like to call it the sustainability art director, because it's
nice.
Oftentimes you get the sustainability coordinator who know a lot about everything, but they're coming from more of an admin side of that fence. And the art department, we know in a very holistic way what the workflows are and how things will unpack down the line. Whereas when we have to talk to Albert, when we have to talk to these other productions, we're having to explain every step of the way in a lot of long conversations why we need things to be a certain way. If there's an art department, an art director who's not drafting, who's not doing these things, but actually working through the reality and the logistics of how your processes unpack down the line, that person could really help streamline everything. And they're kind of straddling the design department and the ethical sustainability department, which in hand, those things work hand in hand to just make the entire department more efficient. So I think that it's not just another role that's been added to the time to the bottom line of your overall department budget, but you're going to pay for yourself in one way or another. That role, a sustainability art director, that role will pay for itself and give you some great choices as well, because they're going to have their creative thinking cap on as well as being ethical.
Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting. I'm going to ask you one more question that I'm going to push you for a single answer, and this is going to be tricky because I'm only giving you two choices. But what do you think is more damaging to sustainability on a production? Limited prep or late scripts?
Oy vey.
I mean, I know you'll say both because I
Yeah,
would.
yeah, they are both, but I think limited prep is definitely the winner there, because late scripts, that happens, but
Yeah, but
you know,
should
we
it?
it should not happen. I mean, if I just went to production and said, "Yeah, that set that I said I was going to have ready today,
Yeah,
it's
it's not
not
ready.
ready. It's not
Yeah,
ready." I'd be fired in like
of
three
course.
seconds.
Yeah.
I can't believe that script writers can just not have the scripts ready, and like what's holding that up? I don't, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but come on.
I think it's an
Um,
industry-wide problem, and I
it is.
personally, I think late scripts are way more damaging because they have such a knock-on effect to every single department. With a late script becomes a late schedule, and therefore late planning, and the lack of planning in my mind, not only damaging for sustainability, but very damaging financially. And from a mental health point of view, it's enormously stressful. I think personally, I would say late script would trump that every single time.
I see what you mean, and one other factor that is in that is when you're talking about being sustainable, it's not just materials. One of the biggest resources in our industry is the personnel, and we are oftentimes treated as disposable in our industry. And you touched on something, the mental health and the morale building. When that happens, and we start to think of ourselves as just these machines that are forced to put this out, we're told just get on with it, just do it. We burn out. And being sustainable is also having wellness at work and treating people in a way that's responsible towards the human experience. It's not just a job. We need to live our lives, and we need to not hurt ourselves. We need to not burn out. We need to have time for our families, and we need to have the headspace to be able to make these great decisions when we're backed into a corner with no margins. We need to have our brains working at full capacity, and we can't do that when we're absolutely burned to the ground.
Very good point. Very good point. I'm going to come to you, Jimmy. Final couple of questions. Can we truly expect sustainability when the wider production model is based on speed, disposability, and constant reinvention?
Yeah, I think we definitely can. I think speed and sustainability can go hand in hand. Like Rhidian said at the beginning, sustainability is about efficiencies and finding those efficiencies. How can we make everyone's life easier and better? And like Blair said, give people the space to be able to design in the best way. Disposability, I think, is going to be the real big thing with film and TV. How do we get around the tear down culture that we currently have in film and TV from a construction and design perspective? And how do we park the ego and make it easier to reuse set pieces and designs?
Brilliant. Thank you. And Rhidian, one last question. What is the biggest misconception about sustainability?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, my glib answer is that we're all just going to be super happy, clappy tree huggers who are going to shout at you for having a bacon sandwich. No, sorry, that's a joke. So I think the the biggest misconception, potentially, I'm not calling you out, Jonathan, is maybe linked to the question that you posed earlier about expense and effort. And I think this has become a recurring theme throughout what we've talked today, that sustainability shouldn't be viewed as as something extra or in competition with speed or quality of end product or efficiency. It should be considered as actually something that all of those things can be. So as Jimmy just pointed out, I think we can definitely and actually also to link to what Blair said earlier, for instance, it would be quicker if Blair, as an art director, was able to say, right, rather than me needing 2 days to source 20 prop options and bring them to the director and lay them out and say it's going to be this armchair or that armchair, I'm going to take 1 day and I'm going to source 3. And that's a very basic maths, but that is an example where we're saving on the sourcing of all those things, saving on where they have to go afterwards. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the number of Oscars or the IMDb rating or the box office of that entire production. And that's one choice. And if we magnify that up to the 10,000 individual choices that plus probably that a director has to make on each production, and we look at ways of making that more efficient, that is also more sustainable. So I'd say that the fact that sustainability is something extra, in fact, it should be an inherent part of what we're doing all the time. We joke sometimes in the office that our aim as a sustainability department is to no longer exist, because we won't be needed to go into every other department. We will have brilliant people in every department like Blair, who is acting as a sustainable art director. It may not become actually on the call sheet your job title, but you'll have a sustainable gaffer, you'll have the sustainable transport captain. Every single person is taking that on and just putting that into their day-to-day. So it's not something extra, it's inherent, I would say, is my main misconception.
I think that's a great answer, really great answer. And also, that again, this is the kind of wider issue, is the wastefulness in choice, potentially. Does somebody need to see 20 different sofas before they can make a decision? And
No.
and it's kind of tempering that ambition to fit within the new remit. And I feel like that has not changed. If anything, it's got worse in my experience. People are demanding more options than they ever used to. And I think that's a really, really pertinent point that you made, and something that we all need to address. But before we end, I just want to remind everyone that entries are still open for our Planet Positive Award this year, which will be awarded to at our annual award ceremony on the 28th of February next year. But you'll need to get cracking if you want to enter. The award is dedicated to celebrating groundbreaking approaches in environmental sustainability within the art departments of film and TV productions. And we accept entries from BFDG members, BFDG corporate members, studio or production teams working closely with the art department, sustainability consultants or coordinators working with the art department. And you can find more details on the BFDG website at britishfilmdesigners.com. So all that's left to say is thank you so much, all of you, for participating in this fantastic chat. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I really hope that it inspires all of our viewers to be more sustainable and to find out more about what you guys do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks so much.